minutes so I can provide some legal advice to the board, and I don't think it'll take more than about 10 minutes or so. It's my plan, and then come back and continue with your agenda.
Okay. So this is closed session.
That's right. So with your permission, the board will now call a closed session pursuant to the Texas Open Meetings Act provision to obtain.
So now we're going to begin the Traffic Commission work session being held today, Monday, April 2nd at 10:23 a.m. Everybody got a copy of this, right?
I think we want to start by, if it please you, going through the information we just got from the attorney.
Okay. So we're going to go through the handouts that we have here.
Do you want to go through these one at a time, or do you just want to let people read through them for a few minutes and then?
I'll go by y'all's recommendation.
Okay, so for clarification, we're reviewing existing ordinances. That's correct? Okay, from other cities.
Yes.
Okay.
We're going to go through issues one at a time, just like the way you eat an elephant. And one of the things the City Commission wants us to do is to not just give them our proposal, but to know how we arrived at it. Just sort of like in math class when we were in school, your teacher wanted to know not just the answer to the mathematics problem, they want to know how you got there. They want to know if you know the material. Is that good? Your recommendation, sir?
I would ask the commission if they would like to go through these items one at a time, or if we'd like to take a few minutes, go through each of them individually, and then open a discussion to them. But what would the commission please?
I'm open for one at a time.
Okay. These are all in the same order, I think. They started out that way. So we'll start with the Safety Board proposes ban on cell use while driving from the Accident Reconstruction Journal.
So, just as a question, we have the National Transportation Safety Board recommending recommendations. And then we also have almost the same recommendations from the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration. Is that the same, one and the same? And this is just one that...
Those are not the same agencies.
They're not the same agencies. Okay.
Is this a 2012? Is this a 2012 article? I mean, I can only tell from the ad on the side here.
Yeah, let's put that on it.
That's January, February 2005.
Look at your next slide. On page 27.
Oh, I see. Have y'all read the first section yet? Have you kind of gone through that one? I think you just all have. Have y'all had any comments about that? The first section?
The packet first. Yeah, I think that one of the studies found, if we look at the last page about the California observational survey, how people are talking, that OTS, the California Office of Traffic Safety, they actually had a press release that came out just at the beginning of this month, March, not April. And they said that, I'll just read it here. When looking at state crash records 2 years before and 2 years after the handheld ban went into effect, overall traffic deaths declined 22%, while handheld cell phone drivers' deaths went down 47%. So I think these both go hand in hand. But I think that's why I asked about the date, because this came out before the process.
Any other comments? You said this was provided by the media for us?
This is presented by the city manager.
Okay.
This is information that was given to him that he's forwarded on to the commission.
I think one point that's in this report that I don't think the federal government has banned interstate truck and bus drivers from using cell phones. So that ban's already in there. $2,750 fine. Pretty hefty fine.
I've even seen a few school bus drivers.
Well, in that law, there's even some uncertainty about what that law actually states. Is it interstate, or is it intrastate, or is it both? And even I was at a meeting on Friday, as a matter of fact, in San Antonio, and this issue came up. And there are people that are interpreting that if it's interstate travel, then it's banned. But intrastate doesn't have the same exemptions or the same requirements. Plus, there are certain exemptions, and one of those are municipalities. So, for example, if we have a municipal employee that's driving a commercial vehicle, then according to the law, some believe that he would be exempt. There are others that do not believe he's exempt. I've not had a chance to really research and come up with my own conclusion yet. So even in that national law, there are exemptions, which that's where the devil is in the detail.
And while the NTSB may have called for that, the sixth paragraph on page 4, which is actually the front page of this document we're looking at, in the second column, Congress has shown no interest in banning cell phone use or texting while driving, period.
You're talking about the same Congress that hasn't passed the budget in 2 years.
That'd be them.
Going right out there on a limb for them.
Thank you.
Right. I mean, it seems we've got portions of the federal government that want to act and other portions that don't. But as far as I know, the bill has to start in the House, get approved by the Senate, and then get signed by the President to become law. I don't think Mr. LaHood makes law.
I find it to be, when we talk about this as a body, I think everybody's major concern, if it's through education or an ordinance, we've talked about curbing behavior. And a lot of y'all have traveled and noticed a lot of different, I think you've talked about Pennsylvania and so forth. My own experience of curbing behavior I find to be interesting is that a few years ago, you see a lot of 18-wheelers, guys, truck drivers talking on their cell phones, literally holding a hands device. And I worked on the NASCAR and drag racing circuit, so a lot of guys, those are all 18-wheelers that transport all the race cars around and so forth. And one thing, I was just in Indianapolis not too long ago, and I was at one of their shops. And one thing that's curbed their behavior is that law. And all their drivers now actually have handheld, or those little microphone things that they wear. Bluetooth. And even when I'm driving around, even like around here, I'll see a guy, a tow truck guy, driving around, and he has that device on. So I think one thing that law has done, maybe the interpretation might not be right with a lot of people, but what it has shown to me is that it's curb behavior, that they know that they're not allowed to talk on their cell phone, at least holding the phone anyway. So I find that to be pretty interesting, even in the
I
study.
think one of the points that we're all concerned about, and we wouldn't even be discussing this, is on that second page where it says using a cell phone while driving is associated with roughly a quadrupling of crash risk. That's what we're dealing with. I mean, that's what our concern is.
And while I don't necessarily disagree with that, I think it's important to note. I mean, okay, second paragraph, first page. More than 3,000 people were killed in distracted driving crashes in the United States. Well, why do accidents happen? Because people don't notice the stop sign. They don't notice the traffic signal. They don't notice what's going on around them. They don't notice the guy in the blind spot. And to say that all of these distractions are cell phones, I think is making a bit of a leap. It may not be, but I think it may be, because there are an awful lot of things. I mean, before we had the I got to talk on my phone, we had the CBs. So we had the guys riding down the road with the CB in one hand, and you know what I'm saying? It's been going on for quite a while. And as a traffic engineer that's worked on a number of highway safety improvement projects, I mean, DOTs go out and spend millions and millions of dollars every year upgrading the safety to interchanges and roadways and bridges and all sorts of things. And to say, well, you know, we looked at the accident rate and it's down. It must be the cell phone thing. I've been involved in way too many safety improvement projects to be led there blindly. Maybe it's helped. I have not made up my mind as to what's a help and what's not. And, but all I'm trying to say is that there's a lot more things going on out there. Cars are a lot safer than they used to be. So I would expect deaths in car crashes to go down just because of that. Never had side curtain airbags in a vehicle until my daughters started driving. And I, by golly, made sure I have in there. So I'm just saying, like we said last week, the studies, what's written, maybe a grain of salt on some of them. Not that they aren't right, not that they're not without meaning, but there's more going on out there.
Yeah, it is a complex system. Yeah.
Very complex. There's a lot of components to
I
this.
think the one thing that, when the introduction of new technology, we know that infamous Ohio study that said talking on a cell phone, not texting, but talking, is as if you're drunk while you're driving. Right? And there's even, you guys know Mythbusters, that TV show? Mm-hmm. There's even a Mythbusters episode where they try to bust that myth, but it's confirmed. And they went through some pretty good rigorous testing of that to see if while you're yapping on the phone, can you handle complex kind of cognitive work. So I think if we're looking at that Ohio study and some other data that suggests that operating a vehicle limits your ability of doing that just like drinking a lot, and that's equivalent to a cell phone, then I think regardless of the complexity of the system, we're adding a level of data onto that complexity. I think that's the single issue.
I don't disagree with that at all. In fact, I said in the last meeting, I think anything that takes your mind, any distraction, anything at all that takes your mind off of the task at hand is bad.
So I guess my issue then is, if we know that certain behavior, texting and speaking on the phone are bad, then does an ordinance or legislation prohibiting that, does that affect that? Does that make it less bad?
that's what we're here to try to determine is
Right.
if we can determine at all whether legislation would have an impact. Well, there's the study that says, well, if you do that, they'll try to hide it. Okay. Maybe some validity to that, maybe not. Is there... I lost my train of thought here for a second. Is the educational component of what we're doing more important than perhaps a ordinance? And people think they can do it. I don't know if everybody's seen the video of the woman walking through the mall on her cell phone and walked right into a fountain. Just took a head right into the fountain. People think they can do things that until they have a problem with it, they don't realize they're just getting lucky. Pass people on the freeway all the time, doing substantially under the speed limit. Pretty much the common item there is the cell phone. They slow down because they think it's safer. But anytime you have a vehicle moving slower in a traffic stream, not a good thing. So the way people think about the cell phone, use it all the time, answer it all the time. It's always there. It's always good. I can handle this. Is it more important to educate them that, the studies show that this is not something that should be done, not even by professionals, rather than the ordinance that a lot of people aren't willing to go towards. I'm just throwing it out for consideration.
Yeah, I'm just trying to evaluate the preponderance of the evidence that we have in front of us. And the only thing that I can really see, I see a lot of people talking about this study, the one that we're mentioning here, the highway loss data institute. A lot of people talking about the same study, everyone referring to the same study. So when you're kind of doing some research, you find all these people saying, oh, these ordinances don't work, but they all relate back to the same study. So I can't find any other studies that kind of could mirror that.
Well, I didn't put a lot of weight on that study.
Yeah, I got you. I'm just trying to ask, has anyone else found other things, or we can dig deeper. I've dug pretty far, and I found a lot of things talking about the danger of cell phone use, danger of texting. And then some studies that kind of refute this, that say ordinances do work, but they do go hand in hand. We talked about this last time. And I think one of the things that we have to determine is what does that mean in our circumstance, and how do we have a campaign that explains this to people and changes that mentality?
Well, I found it to be interesting that I brought this up last week, and it says right here on the third page of the same handout that we're talking about. The first seatbelt laws were passed in the mid-'80s, 30 years ago. Yeah. And I distinctly remember at that time, even being in my late teens, of people who thought that was ridiculous, and how asinine seatbelt laws were, and that there was no data that you would save lives on that. And mainly because a lot of cars back then had lap belts. They weren't, even back in the 80s, they didn't even, it wasn't even until the late 80s that you started having where they were automatic. If you remember, they'd come over your, and they'd strap on for you because people weren't wearing them. So what they were doing, what the manufacturers were doing is we can't get people to wear their seatbelts, so we'll put them on for them, because they were recognizing the federal law of mandatory seatbelts. You can still drive around the country on interstates and state highways, and those signs are still up, buckle up, it's the law. And you can tell how old those are. Those signs are still 20, 30 years old. But it's funny, if you look in here, it says you still have 16% on average of the people out there still aren't wearing seatbelts. But we also have TxDOT paying the city of Amarillo overtime money to have officers, not to go write red light tickets that kill people. We're sending out officers to write tickets of people who aren't wearing their seatbelts to hurt, that in essence, if they have an accident, they hurt themselves. So the state of Texas finds it to be important to protect you from yourself, but we don't find it important for the state of Texas to protect you from someone running into you without it being your power. Do you see the irony there? I mean, it's just very interesting.
I'm sorry. I got a call.
My argument, the state of Texas or the federal government, let me just explain it. Federal government thinks it's so important that if I go and I crash my car and I roll it and I get thrown out of my car, in essence, I hurt myself, correct?
I understand what you said, Chris.
So the government thinks it's so important for me to protect, they're going to protect me, but they're not going to protect me from running into your daughter while I'm text messaging my story.
I understood that.
Okay.
But I don't understand the point. I got a call from a gal whose house backs up on 45th. She wanted me to prevent people from drag racing and speeding down 45th. All I can do is put a police officer out there. All I can do is put in a request to Amarillo PD. I can't make people stop doing that. I can't make people not run red lights. The laws are on the books. It is illegal. It's illegal to drag race. It's illegal to speed. It's illegal to run these traffic control devices. But when somebody calls and says, "You've got to stop this," what can I do?
I'm confused.
How can you stop two kids from speeding, from drag racing? There's laws against it. The law doesn't protect you. It doesn't stop it. It's illegal. It's a risk people are willing to take. Apparently some people.
You know, the one word I keep hearing over and over again is risk. And I think that's the one that probably gives me the biggest concern, because I think we would all agree that distraction, whatever form it takes, cell phone or otherwise, is a risk that you take. And so it becomes a personal choice of, well, is the risk worth the activity? Here's where I get a little concerned when we start saying that using this or this activity results in fatality. To me, that means every time you do it, there's a guaranteed result. And I don't think that's necessarily the case with cell phone use. Whether you're texting, whether you're talking, whether you're using some other function, yes, there are some cases where the risk is that you may end up in an accident, and in some occasions that takes place. I don't think there's any study that says that using a cell phone guarantees that you're going to have an accident. Now, we would all agree that it sure makes it more risky, and your chances of having an accident go up because it is a risky behavior. I think that's the part I'm concerned about. Is that risk a 1%, a 50%? It's not 100% because there's not a guaranteed correlation between use and always getting the same result. And I think that's the thing we keep kind of dancing around is, okay, I think we all would put a different number on what is the risk of talking? What is the risk of texting? In my opinion, texting has a higher risk level than the talking does. In all of these, we talked about an increased risk. Yeah, not wearing a seatbelt is an increased risk of bodily injury. But the bodily injury doesn't happen because you didn't put the seatbelt on. It's a result of an accident and not having the seatbelt on. So I think that's the thing that I'm struggling with is how do we determine what that risk percentage actually is for that specific function? Because I don't think any of us would disagree that there is a risk of using a cell phone while driving, period. I'd be surprised if anybody said, no, I don't think there's a risk at all. I think there's some because it does cause you to be more distracted. Like Jerry said, all distractions can be a problem. I think we once again just focus upon the phones because that's our only task today is to just look at the phones. But based upon the data, there are some that put more emphasis that it's a higher risk. There are others that say, well, it's a risk, it's not as high. And then they break it down into different activities, whether it's any type of communication, whether it's hands-free, whether it's talking up to your ear, whether it's talking in your lap, whether you're texting. texting, whatever the case may be, I think we can all associate some type of risk with that type of behavior. I just don't, it's going to be really difficult for us to all agree, but somehow we're going to have to get to that point. What is the actual risk for this behavior? Based upon that final risk determination, at that point, then how do you address it? Yes, passing a law doesn't guarantee anything any more than not passing a law is going to continue to allow freedom. I just think that it's going to be a really difficult study for us to try to come through these different studies that have different emphasis. Sometimes the results are a little bit different from case to case. But I'm still hung up on that word risk. I don't know what your thoughts are. That's just my summary of the whole.
I guess my question is for the devil's advocates in the room, is I would like to know what your, obviously, I'm probably would consider myself probably one of the more conservative members of Amarillo, almost to the point of Ron Paul, libertarian. So I'm not real for passing laws and ordinances and government becoming more intrusive. But I guess my question is, people who are really opposed to it, are you really opposed to it just because you don't want the city or the state or the federal government telling you what to do in your own car? I mean, because if that's the point, then maybe we shouldn't have stop signs, and we shouldn't have seatbelt laws, and we shouldn't have helmet laws. I mean, I'm really confused about. We talk about the safety innovations of the great work of engineers and cars and traffic engineers to save people's lives. Then let me put my hand around your reasoning why you don't think a law, even if you only write one ticket a year, is not a good tool to have to curb behavior.
I'm not entirely opposed to writing laws that curb behavior. But I don't know of any law that does.
You don't know of any law that curbs behavior?
I'm pretty sure somebody's been convicted based on every law that's passed, which means 100% failure rate in changing behavior. Banks still get robbed.
You have 100%.
I'm just saying, banks still get robbed. All sorts of bad behavior still goes on. So it changes the behavior of the law-abiding citizen. It doesn't change the behavior of those who choose not to abide by society's rules.
It's called scofflaw.
Yes. So to change behavior through ordinance or legal action is there a big benefit to trying to change society's behaviors through passing laws? Or is it and this doesn't rise to that level, don't get me wrong. Or are we better off trying to educate the motoring public as to how distracted they are when they're on their cell phone? And like I said, I haven't made up my mind either way yet as to whether this ordinance is, it is.
Are you opposed to this? But what I gathered, this is just for information for myself, when discussing about cell phone bans in school zones, and you thought little Tommy and little Susie are not aware of what takes place. So what I gathered from our discussion last week was that you're for cell phone bans in school zones.
What I was asked was why that group of people was elevated above another.
That's what I was asking.
And yeah, that was the question I was asking. And my answer to that is, when you've got a bunch of kids pushing and teasing, and slapping and running around, and they're not paying attention, they've all been sent to the same place, but they're not particularly paying attention. They're running around and stuff, around cars and playing chase and slap and tickle and all that good stuff. They're distracted. People driving on the road don't necessarily have kids, don't necessarily know whether school's in or out, may or may not care. But if they're on the phone, they may be just as distracted and not see the school speed limit sign or the ban on. You asked why that one group was elevated above the others, and it's because my answer was because they haven't achieved the degree of maturity yet that they need to be more aware of their surroundings and how to behave in them.
Do you have any idea, I wish Lieutenant Miller was here, how many school zone speeding tickets were written in 2011?
A lot.
There was close to 1,000 of them.
Okay, for argument's sake, we passed a law, state law, and the city passed that law on to having higher fines in creating school zones, and we wrote 1,000 tickets in 2011. By your definition, we curbed zero behavior in school zones, and by your definition, all we are in the city of Amarillo is a revenue stream for the city to write tickets in school zones.
Not at all what I said.
Well,
Very clever, but it's not
but that's
at
your
all what I said.
definition, that we curb behavior by zero, because you're going to have people who are going to speed in school zones anyway, especially people who don't have kids because they don't care about kids. They're going to speed through school zones.
Didn't say
so
that.
we shouldn't pass ordinances because it's going to have zero effect on behavior.
Okay, we have a comment.
Yeah, Madam Chairman, as one who has studied the law, and you just discussed the philosophy of law, which is what y'all are doing, I would disagree. I don't think laws are meant to change behavior. These are called penal laws. They're not meant to change behavior. They're meant to penalize certain behavior. That's as far as it goes. DWI probably doesn't change, but if you do that behavior, there is a penalty for it. So I'm not for or against it. Again, y'all are having a very wonderful philosophical discussion that needs to happen, but there is another viewpoint, and the only viewpoint I've heard expressed so far as being debated pro and con is, does the law change behavior? Well, another viewpoint is that the law is not about changing behavior. It's about identifying objectionable behavior that's objectionable to society and placing a penalty on that behavior, recognizing there are members of society who will ignore the law. There are members of society who will flunk the law. That doesn't change the fact that society has decided we're going to penalize that behavior when someone chooses to do it. That helps advance your discussion.
Craig, I think what Jerry was saying, correct me if I'm wrong, Jerry, but he's just saying not everything's going to be 100% compliant. Not everyone's going to be 100%. Well, you got a point in this report too that the seatbelt laws are now 84% of the drivers are now using seatbelts. So you still got 16% not using seatbelts. But if we could keep 84% of the drivers from talking and texting on their cell phones, I think we'd have a much safer city. I mean, if we could pass an ordinance that was that successful, that's pretty successful.
But didn't it take 20-some years to get to
That's
that point of success?
I'm sure this one.
And there's a lot of education that goes in there. And whether, the click it or take it, and which was, can anybody say which was more successful? The ticket for not wearing the seatbelt or the 20 years of educational information? I mean, you see those crash test dummies go flying around the inside of a vehicle unrestrained. You see them restrained with an airbag.
Well, and also I was curious on the ones that did get tickets in 2011 in the school zones, how many of them have become repeat offenders? Did they learn from the first go around? So that would be a thought also. Are they getting it?
Usually through time, you think so they go to school zone ticket or a construction zone ticket. They don't usually break the law again. Because those are heavy.
Every time I come over at 34th and Janet, years and years and years ago, I got a ticket for not coming to a complete stop this day to make sure at that particular corner I come to a complete stop. So I learned, and I'm kind of long.
I would think back to, can I go to Michael's point about what is the number? How do we know the specific about the risk? You know, if we say no risk is 1 and a ton of risk is 10, where does this fall? So I think I don't have that information, but that information is available because it's based on these other studies. Like I had mentioned, cell phone talking is equivalent to driving drunk. So I think we can make equivalents in certain things. But I think to get a good answer on that, we really need. I would really like to be able to. We all share a common document about the overview of all the information on these studies. I think that would be really helpful for us. And not necessarily Duncan says, this is a pro statement, a con statement, more this is what it says and this is what the conclusion is. And maybe that's our core document we can go off of. Because I think a lot of the time we're talking, and we talk, sometimes it gets into some generalities that we don't have information about certain things. I do that a lot. I'll make a claim when I won't really have information behind it. So I would really recommend that we maybe have a draft. That's why I want to get into that, where we have a draft of what the information is we can find, and we can kind of talk about that in the group and say this is where we are today. And then the gaps in that we don't have, we messed up. We missed some studies. And some people, especially in the public comments, will come up and say, hey, you forgot this one. That would be terrific. So we can incorporate that. Or we can start someplace. So I'll leave that to you. How do you work with that?
I like that. And I'm kind of wondering, what would you think about doing a subcommittee to study something more in detail to bring them back to a work session?
I think it's great.
Okay.
I would want to be on that.
I think you'd be
I make an observation on the seatbelt law. Yes, it took 20 years to get where we are today for compliance. But it took more than law and education. More people are using seatbelts out there before. That's plus, okay? If the law helps, it's a starting point to go from there. And it takes 20 years to make it compliant. That's good. I was using seatbelts in 1964. I was a commercial pilot. You get an airplane, you get upside down, you're upside down. You know, again, I had a seatbelt in my 1964 Pontiac, a lap belt. I put it in myself. But in the case, let's look at that seatbelt law and think about that. If it had an effect, even though it did take long term, let's look at it.
And it's funny that you bring that up because I had a 62 Chevy Impala for my first car, and it did come with factory seatbelts on it. And my dad was so proud of that because of the fact that he had been a pilot.
Yeah.
And that's exactly why he wanted me to have a seatbelt. So that's kind of cool. We're both old farts. Are we allowed to say fart?
How old you are?
Isn't that crazy of those cars? It wasn't until later that those were actually dealer options.
Yep.
You would mark on your car, I want a reverse lights,
What
tail
is it?
lights, and I want seatbelts.
I appreciate it because you probably haven't noticed, but I'm short. And the way that I got to be able to see to drive was that I had to sit on pillows and phone books. And so what held me together was the seatbelt. So I really appreciated that. So to this day, I still use
Booster seat.
Yeah, okay, so we've gone down another road here. Sorry.
I'd just say from a summary standpoint, I guess you sent this out to us. I don't know if everybody read it, but we talked about all the data in the country and summarizing it. This report does a lot of that. And plus, it also addresses the educational factor of how they created the material and what they, it ended out phone in one hand, ticket in the other was what they felt like was But it also gives you a good definition or complete definition of distracted driving.
The reason I
This
like that study is because we talk about primary, not on punishment, but we talk about primary effects of things that happen in traffic, right? You're talking on the phone, you crash into somebody. But what if you're talking on the phone, make somebody else behind you want to switch over because you're driving frantically, and then they smash into somebody. So that what that study did was, instead of the previous one we were talking about, they didn't look at crashes. They actually did observational methods of who was talking on the phone or texting. And they just sat in the corners and watched people. And it's a pretty good indicator of, if we're not necessarily talking about change behavior in the law, but what people did when they stopped. It's a dramatic decrease in that after the ordinance went through, but also that huge education plan. And in that study, it actually gets down to the media buys and what they do for buying commercial airtime things. So a lot of the pieces that we really need to talk about later on, is we're going to aggregate information.
One of the challenges, if I may, we provided you a dozen or so ordinances from other cities here in Texas. Provided you the Santa Fe ordinance. Said somebody was interested in that, so we pulled that up this morning. There are so many variables. We go back to scientific method and identify, trying to do a one-to-one correlation between an anti-texting statute had X effect on accidents. Because there's so many variables. Was it the penal ordinance, or was it the educational component? Was it the fact that, in other words, if you take these cities that have, it'd be nice to look at a statistical thing. Before the ordinance, how many accidents did you have in your city? 300,000. After the ordinance, how many did you have? 307,000. Or maybe 296,000. Well, what are all the variables? You have more people moving in, so you have a larger number of drivers and driver miles being driven in your city. Educational components. It's just interesting that I don't know if there is empirical data that ties a single cause, unless it's on the EPS traffic report when they check the box, alcohol involved, speed involved, unless you've got that kind of statistical gathering capability, that you'll ever, at least in the near future or in the current, be able to get that one-to-one correlation that some people in the room seem to want to crave, that if you pass this, it will reduce by X number of accidents. I just don't know that we have that specific data on cause and effect. How do you measure the effect of education versus the fact that it's a $500 fine? I'm not sure how you do that unless you take a survey of people or something.
That's been my number one problem from the very beginning of these statistics, or even, pro or against an ordinance, is that we have, even in our own city, most time when an accident takes place, other than being alcohol involved, so forth, sort of like if you talk to an OBGYN, why the statistical analysis of certain birth control methods aren't 100%. And the reality of it is the reporting. If the wife actually missed one pill, and she's not going to admit that she made a mistake, and that skews the reporting. So the point here is that even if we pass an ordinance, that we may never see the change effect because the reporting. It's been my problem from the very beginning. I think where I come from, I'm a lot less against passing an ordinance as I'm 1,000% of a super aggressive educational program. But I also believe that you have to have something to back up the educational program, and that's where the ordinance comes into effect.
I agree with that.
To me, it's, a lot of people, it's been described by newspaper editorials that this is just another nanny state or whatever, just passing laws to do whatever. I think the most important thing here is education. I think the thing that's stopped DWIs the most is not that the Mothers Against Drunk Driving who just made the punitive damages harder and harder and harder, because those people are going to, when you got third and fourth time offenders, it hasn't hurt anything. But the education of, with all the alcohol companies have made a big effort about don't drink and drive campaigns on billboards and so forth. I think that has probably had a bigger effect than the laws on the book that made it more punitive to drive while drinking. So, I mean, I think whatever we suggest to the commission, I think you can make a really weak ordinance if you so be it. But what has to really be in effect is a really strong educational program. Not a few yard signs here and there and a couple little signs. I mean, a really hard, concerted effort educational program. And not just working with a couple other people. I mean, a really almost effect where you have somebody for the first year really working with different entities. That means business, other governmental entities, and really educating.
It's going to be very interesting when y'all do get to the public hearings to hear from the public. Do they want a strong ordinance? Do they want a strong education program? Someone mentioned earlier about individual freedom. I don't know if it's an apple and oranges comparison, but for what it's worth, you all remember that there's a lot of people in our community that want to stamp out tobacco. And they got all their health reasons and economic reasons for that. Well, that's gone to a vote of our community not once but twice. You know the results. The community said, no, we're not going to have government telling us to do that. Some say, yes, private property rights prevail. Others say that flies in the face of scientific evidence and studies about health. Well, that's what we got in Amarillo. That's our culture. That's why it's so important that you have these public hearings and you weigh what will our community accept. Because I think it's an interesting comparison. There's another safety issue, tobacco, health. Some view it as that, and others say, no, that's my personal liberty you're invading. And I think I would encourage you to have your public hearings sooner than later as you're trying to formulate your ideas of what works in this community, what will this community respond to. And I apologize, I'm getting out of law and into your topic. But, it's just an observation I wanted to offer. Again, you've got so many sources of information to evaluate. Y'all just talked about one so far today. You've got other city ordinances. There's pros and cons of each of those. The way they're written, we try to summarize at the top for each the nutshell of what that ordinance does. You see there are broader and more narrow ordinances. I have no idea what the accident statistics are in those cities, if it's gone up or down since they enacted those ordinances.
Well, we kind of went with last week when we kind of made our agreement to move forward is that we already had an ordinance in place, that being the school zones. As a matter of something to move forward with, that document just expanding outside of the school zones to the outer city limits.
The draft
said we can look at ordinances all over the world, but we already have a good document that drafted by the state of Texas and by the city of Amarillo.
Well, what it shows you when you look at the city ordinances is there are nuances. You're going to hear a lot of nuances when you get to the public comment period. And when you decide, well, maybe we should tweak ours, are we going to be out of the mainstream? It's real nice to be able to flip over and go, oh, that's the way Arlington does it. Oh, that's what Plano does. We're not the Lone Ranger out there, so to speak. We gave you those ordinances because there are nuances as to how broad or narrow the exceptions are. And generally, in my experience in Amarillo, we try to stay in the mainstream. It's seldom we become cutting edge. And so if you want to ask yourself, whenever you consider some particular element of our draft ordinance, or when the public focuses in on part of it, sometimes it is good, I think, to have a reference of other city ordinances and say, well, this really isn't all that odd. Here's 7 cities who have this particular clause. Or maybe it's the opposite. Maybe it isn't odd. We've got a clause in ours and go, there's only one other city we can find that has that. Maybe we can compromise or give them that detail. That's, I would suggest, is the benefit of having the other city ordinances as part of those nuances. FYI, the draft ordinance that my office did prepare, that the City Commission began discussing and realized how complex this is and sent it to you. It was largely taken from the Arlington ordinance. Arlington has an excellent reputation among municipal attorneys. J.W. is a great city attorney. And so largely as you go through and you compare the Amarillo draft, you'll see great similarities between the Arlington ordinance. Arlington, guess where they got theirs from? San Antonio. I asked Jay. I said, that's good work y'all did. He said, well, you can thank San Antonio. So cities try not to reinvent the wheel. You'll begin to see 2 or 3 different main tracks that they take on a topic like this. And you may decide a different track. Maybe you want us to use the Missouri City model. There are differences in ways to approach this. After your public hearing, after you finish studying the literature and the field.
These are all good examples.
What I find interesting is on the exemption parts, or the set parts.
Yeah.
On the ordinances.
The San Antonio particularly, except not even number talking your GPS function.
Yeah. I don't know how you enforce that. The officer stops you and you go, oh, I was just checking my calendar.
Yeah.
Oh, I was just looking up the address for this appointment I'm going to.
Yeah. We don't want you to be distracted because you're texting, but we don't mind you using a math quest or something.
Yeah, using your calculator. You're trying to figure your payroll in your head or something. Well, I'll just use my calculator, officer. That goes back to your primary and secondary enforcement discussion last week. You know, the easiest ordinance to enforce is one that just absolutely bans the handheld cell phone. Period. End of question. You're kind of like a seatbelt law. Either it is or it isn't.
Yeah.
Either it is or it isn't. When you start trying to define particular functions on that device, you've necessarily gone to secondary enforcement.
You're muddying the water.
You have. You know, primary enforcement is always about observable offenses. I see the seatbelt, I don't see the seatbelt. That's primary enforcement. I stop you for that. Now I ask for your insurance card. I can't observe that. That's secondary enforcement. You had another reason to contact the offender. So most city ordinances, the overwhelming majority of city ordinances are primary enforcement. We want the officer to have probable cause to make a stop for a particular behavior they're observing. So as drafted, it is primary enforcement. It's an absolute ban. It's what the city council sent back to you for discussion purposes. Not to say you're bound to stay with that. And the city commission earnestly wants your candid idea of what will or won't work. They're not bound by what they sent back to you. But FYI, most city ordinances are primary enforcement. The secondary often come under state law and the state transportation code. Like this weekend, as I was working in the yard, I was trying to think of a city ordinance of secondary enforcement. It's hard to come up with one because, again, we focus on primary behavior. What does the officer see, hear, that they can take action on? Sure.
Well, Commissioner Mayor, you had talked about doing a subcommittee. Do we have others that would like to be on the subcommittee with you to help us be able to come up with what we need from the study to present to our group?
I'm friendly.
I'll be on it.
Okay. Anyone else? How about you? No, thank you.
Start to travel.
Okay. So you want to oversee that?
I'll do it.
Okay.
And if you need staff assistance, we're always available to help you with that. Just whatever you want to do. You're not alone. Okay.
Because you've done a good job on research. All of you have. You've been contributing information. And I keep looking at this one from Santa Fe. I like the way that it's worded. And I like like what Craig mentioned a while ago about the one that we've got set up already for school zones. It has a lot of good definitions and stuff. So let y'all study that and bring it back to us with your findings.
Okay, so the subcommittee is looking at reports only. Are they looking at ordinances? Just for clarification, what exactly is the focus of the subcommittee?
I think that it sounds like our task is to look at just the surveys, reports, and studies that have.
Okay, so it's narrow. It's not including ordinance revisions or observations, just studies?
Yeah, I think that's where I'm, I
Okay.
think that's what I'm hearing. They'll have to come back with the data.
Well, I was hearing the same thing, I just want to make sure it's clear.
Yeah.
Okay.
Then we all have a copy of the ordinance that was done for the school zone,
Yeah.
so we can kind of correlate the two, see what's missing, what's there. Would that be good?
I'm sorry, Madam Chairman, I got confused there. Are you referring to our current school zone ordinance, or are you referring to the ordinance the city commission sent back to you? They are different.
The one that they sent back to us,
Oh,
but
that's
from what I
different.
understand, wasn't that designed off the school zone?
Well, some of it's in common, yes, some of it's in common.
Okay.
But that's the one that we basically tweaked from Arlington.
Okay.
We used I like the way we wrote our definitions better than Arlington, so I kept our definition section intact, but I used their substantive provisions.
And that's one of the reasons why I had asked if you could be here today.
Sure.
Because of that.
And like I said, that gets into drafting ordinances. There's lots of nuances. And there's lots of places you can start from. You can start with just the school zone ordinance and make it citywide. You can take other places too. And I just went to see those cities that had citywide names and started with that. It was interesting how many cities, some prominent cities in Texas that don't have such an ordinance. Plano, Dallas only has it in school zones. It's interesting those that don't have.
As I've looked at a few of these ordinances, I have a legality question.
Sure.
An officer observes a person talking on their cell phone, and they just so happen to be not completely stopping at a stop sign. Pulls a person over. I'll take this back. The scenario is person drives, doesn't stop completely at a stop sign. Officer pulls them over, and the cell phone is sitting in their cup holder. Let's just say it's even lit up. Does the officer have the legal right at this point, even with probable cause, to say, I think you were also text messaging? Can I see your phone? Can you look at your phone to see if there is a current inbound text message? Because you read a lot of these ordinances, they say receive or view the text messages, and sometimes my phone will ring and I'll just look at it.
Well, the answer to your question, you're not going to like this, but the answer is tell me what the ordinance says in your hypothetical. You see, that goes into those nuances. Some of these cities say you can't even view a text message. Some of them say you cannot compose or send a text message. So to answer your hypothetical, it's going to depend on what the law is in that city as to what that officer has to follow the cause to reach in or look at and do.
I mean, I guess my question is if you have a cell phone inside of the officer, does he have the right?
Inherently, no.
To look at your cell phone?
Inherently, no. Now, you tell me what the city ordinance is, and he may have that right then. It depends on what your ordinance says and those nuanced details. A word like send or a word like view makes a huge difference. That's why we gave you those samples to read them very carefully. There's very different approaches that different cities have taken in Texas. And an officer's authority is bound by what those ordinances are, so it varies from city to city. So all I'm saying, Commissioner, is tell me the rest of your hypothetical. Tell me in that hypothetical city what the ordinance is, and I can tell you what the officer can and can't do.
I think when you watch cops or whatever, they ask them if they can search their car, if they have drugs, and if not, they'll just bring up a drug dog. And my question is if they pull you over for a speeding violation and they can stack it by they just so happen to have a telephone laying there.
Right. No, it would depend on the nature of the ordinance in that city. And again, it's just another Class C misdemeanor. I don't think we're going to be. I'm not going to try to get the city into a civil rights lawsuit where we'll spend 6 digits defending such an ordinance on action of an officer. There's plenty of Class C misdemeanors who write tickets for.
On all these ordinances, are they moving violations?
Some are and some are not. Arlington, is it Arlington or was it one of the others, it specifically said this is not a moving violation. Most of them leave it as a moving violation because the offense itself, in most of it, says while the vehicle is in motion or while the operator is operating the vehicle. Some phrase to that nature. So yes, most of them are moving violations.
What is the do you have any feel for the possibility that this might be taken out of our hands and by a state mandate? With the next, I mean, there's so many states that have done it statewide. I mean, is there, do you have any feel for what Texas might do?
My legislative crystal ball, I'm not going to say is any better than your crystal ball, but I'll tell you what mine says. It says that thus far, the Texas legislature has not passed a statewide tobacco ban because of competing interest over personal liberty. We've already seen that there have been bills introduced on this subject, and they barely got the one passed in the school zones last time. Why did that get passed? Our society values protection of children, plain and simple. You show me a law that will protect children, and that law's got a good chance of being passed, no matter whose liberty it hinges upon. So I'm not surprised we passed one for school zones. Again, it's good public policy to protect children from themselves. But in terms of regulating other general behavior of adults, Congress hasn't done it. The legislature hasn't done it. It's evolving down to cities. City Hall is the most accessible level of government in our federal system. And we're seeing grassroots movements to influence local lawmakers at the city council level. So I do not foresee there'll be a bill introduced. I'm absolutely confident. Probably a couple of bills introduced in January. But with school finance and immigration and the election, I don't see a bill like this getting a lot of traction in the future. That's my 2 cents for it. That's my crystal ball. Yours may see it differently.
It'd be nice if we thought that there was a good possibility it was going to go at the state level.
Yeah, it's controversial. You're already getting a taste of it. What congressman wants to have his switchboard lining up because people saying you've got to do something about texting, and some people saying you keep your dirty hands off of my living in my car? That's a no-win situation for a congressman. It's a no-win situation for a state senator or a state representative. It's a difficult position for a city council. They're lucky to have a traffic commission to do the hard work of sorting this out, being a lightning rod to take those public comments, and if there is any wisdom to be gleaned from all of it, to put that together for them. The legislature, they have their committees, but again, this is a grassroots citizen committee. So.
I will say, I'm not saying that obviously I'm right here, not, but I will say I've served on lots of boards. I was a county commissioner, served on a lot of committees, and have had lots of controversial issues dealt with. And being an owner of a coffee shop, number one thing that people come and talk about is obviously things that affect you. And I've been a part of the tobacco ban. I've never had this many people after a vote, because people will tell me the other on both sides of it. I had one on my Facebook the other day, for the night, but I have not had one person, friend or not, or customer tell me how ridiculous and how stupid of a thing that was. I was very surprised. I thought I would get a lot of, smart aleck comments, a lot of angry type of, and I've gotten those before. It's not the fact that they're afraid to tell me or I'll be upset because I want to know. And when people brought it up, I would ask them what's their opinion. I did not have one person who told me that was stupid, or that's take our rights away. And I had that with smoking ban. I mean, I had that a lot of people who are against smoking, And I was very surprised the amount of people, and a majority of them, I didn't take obviously a poll, but I was very surprised the amount of women that said, good for you. I'm glad someone finally did something. I thought that was Very interesting.
I think that goes hand in hand with some recent statements or studies that I've seen that indicate the vast majority of people think using a cell phone while driving is a dangerous activity. But at the same time, the majority of people admit to doing it. 80% think it's dangerous, 60% do it.
I'm guilty
Our
of it.
society's schizophrenic. We're all messed up. Yeah, we'll say that. We'll talk about both sides of our mouth. And that's what makes this a difficult issue.
Tell you, these meetings have had an effect on me. You know how now if you get in your car and you drive a few blocks and you realize you don't have your seatbelt on, it kind of gives you, it makes your heart beat fast. And it's not that you're worried about getting a ticket. It's just that you know that, if you were in a wreck, you're probably going to get hurt if you don't have your seatbelt on. But I was coming down 3rd Street the other day and there, West 3rd, and riding right through that school zone talking on my cell phone. And I mean, as soon as I hit the sign on the other side, I slowed down, but I forgot to put my cell phone on. And it just gave me that same feeling that, so education works. I mean, it works.
You'll be getting your ticket in the mail.
Another time and date stamp.
I guess you didn't see the red light camera. I've experienced with that.
Me too. Well, we're getting short on time for this meeting, so your subcommittee, when should we get back together as a full committee for another work session? What would be y'all's, and how much time do y'all need?
I don't know. When is that?
It's up to you.
We have a lot of stuff that's consolidating.
Yeah.
So,
A week would be good.
Okay. And when you present your report, if you'll make it consolidated so that we can go through it and see the pros, the cons, and so forth, then it'll help us make a decision if we do that. Okay.
Can I make a suggestion?
You sure may.
Could we, I agree with Mr. Norris, if we give a week here and then we talk about another week of having a work session, I think it would be good for us as a committee, as being transparent as possible, is going ahead and setting a public hearing date, even if it's 3 weeks from now. That way people have a good amount of time to, do their research, or at least planning, that we could go ahead and set our first public hearing, at least what time it's going to be and where. That's just a suggestion, even if we do it 3 weeks from now, or 2 weeks from now, 2.5 weeks from now. That way we're not just saying, once we get our stuff, and then the next following week we'll have our public hearing. If we have it way out there, then people can start planning.
We also need another time for another meeting for all of us also. So we need to schedule both of those, and I need your input, please.
So you're asking for availability? Is that what you're asking?
If everybody doesn't have that, we can do it the same way we've done in the past via email. If everybody will send their schedule to Judy, we'll
Thank you,
figure out.
Mr. Norris.
My pleasure. Thank you.
What's the day we normally meet?
Usually the third Thursday of the month.
Third Wednesday.
Third Wednesday of the month.
Sorry.
Well, that could be our public. That could be our public hearing, couldn't it?
yeah, that's what we discussed.
I think
Yeah.
I like that.
I have my calendar. My calendar.
Yeah.
I think, how about us making that our regular scheduled meeting, the 25th, our public hearing, our first public hearing.
The third Wednesday is the 18th.
It'll be the 18th.
Yeah, the third Wednesday is the 18th. The fourth Wednesday is the 25th.
Yeah, you're correct.
He just wanted to see if you were paying attention.
I better question him.
Okay, so at the meeting on the 18th, then, are we going to have a work session or a regular session?
Let's make that the regular session.
Okay.
The public hearing?
With the public hearing, yeah. We probably won't get much done with the public hearing, I would guess. And somewhere in there, we should probably schedule Mr. Norris back to cover the ins and outs, ABCs of the public hearing process.
And we can do that either some other date, or we can actually do a real quick work session right before the traffic commission meeting and have him go over his recommendations on how to conduct a public hearing, because it's a little bit different than a public meeting.
I like that
That would be
idea.
my recommendation, just have him come in an extra 20 minutes early and do that before the actual traffic commission meeting itself. That way you're not having to make two trips for one event.
So like on the 18th, have a meeting at 1:30 and maybe be here at 1.
If it's in everybody's schedule, and then we can set up for that public hearing and you conduct your first one, and then once that one is concluded, then that commission meeting will be done, and then we can talk about the next step, which I'm assuming is another work session. But very well could be that you want to turn around and the following week have another public hearing. It really depends upon what happens.
But don't we need a work session before we have public hearing?
Yeah, I think that's
what he's saying. Make it 1 o'clock, and then we'll have our meeting at 1:30. Right.
Well, I'm hearing two things. One is I'm hearing we need a little work session to talk about the public hearing process, which Mr. Norris wants to come do. But I'm also hearing that we may need a work session to do another piece of this process.
Well, yeah, we definitely do that.
I don't think you can do all that in 30 minutes.
I don't either.
No, I was talking about another date for that.
Could we do, would you think of a work session like maybe the 16th or 17th? That
Well,
Monday?
they need a week to get their report done, so, really any time at starting back at, I know I'm going to be gone the 19th, 11th, so,
See, they'd have 2 weeks. Would that be enough? You'd have 2 weeks from today. 2 weeks.
If we wanted to say, do something the 16th.
16th or 17th.
Yeah, I think
that work 16th at 10 o'clock, like this one.
Sounds good to me. Are y'all available? Ken, did you have a comment?
Yes, DJ, can we see a show of hands about a quorum on the 18th? I know it's going to be very difficult for me to be there on the 18th.
Oh, really?
But I'm just one person. I'm just wondering if we'll have a quorum then.
So who all will be able to be here on the 18th?
So you're good there.
Yeah.
Okay.
And just to throw it out, if we're going to have a public meeting on the 18th, do we want to maybe schedule the first evening meeting close to that as well, or put it off for a while longer?
I think that's a good idea. Go ahead and
Well, I kind of
Once.
like Mr. Rice's idea. Kind of have your first public hearing and kind of see. We may at that point want to have another work session, and then at that point then schedule a night hearing after that.
I was just thinking the evening meeting might be better attended.
I like the idea of doing the 1:30 that time.
Mm-hmm.
We're saying get to see what kind of feedback we get. We have to show up, and then schedule an evening meeting after that. That'll give some idea.
We may want to have 2 evening meetings.
I would guess a lot of people are at work at 1:30 on Wednesday afternoon, which is the only reason I brought it up. Just people may see that announcement and say, but I gotta work. And but if we advertise the afternoon and the evening, even if they're not at the same time, the same date.
You're saying go ahead and advertise what the 2 public meetings are going to be right now.
Yeah, and that may reduce the angst.
Well, what if we made the evening public meeting Wednesday, either the 2nd or 9th of May?
y'all have any comments?
Because that's 1, 2, If you did the
5 weeks
second,
down
that'd
the
be,
road.
what's that?
Be 5 weeks down the road. It's a long time.
What would be the possibility of doing the evening meeting on the 18th also? I mean, that way you
Making
can
the first one, the evening
have the
meeting.
afternoon meeting, and then you have a break and have the evening meeting, and then we get it all done in one day. I mean, I'm just asking.
You mean doing a regular meeting, a public hearing in the afternoon, then come
Public
back and do
hearing
it
in
at
the
night?
afternoon, come back and have public hearing in the evening, and get it all done in one day. I mean,
Because all we're really doing is listening to input. We're supposed to be listening to, so that's not a bad idea.
I can make an afternoon meeting, but I can't make an evening meeting.
I have an issue on that, having a meeting that evening. I mean, just a personal comment
Yeah.
with the
Right.
schedule for that evening. I sure hate to miss 2 public hearings.
Yeah.
Well, perhaps maybe the Wednesday following, would that work?
25th.
Y'all check your calendars, and you can't do any nighttime meetings, right?
No, I'm just saying that 18th evening, maybe
Okay.
the 18th. I could make
So the
that.
week after, would that work for your
I
schedule?
haven't checked my calendar with you.
Is yours in your car too? That's where mine is. Okay.
25th works for you?
For the evening meeting, yes.
But we'll go ahead and advertise them at the same time, then people see a meeting, go, oh, I can't. I can get one.
At least that's a good idea, because at least they know that they can.
Yeah.
What time are we gonna phone the evening then?
It's up to y'all.
As a recommendation, the city commission meets at 5:30.
That's what I was,
What they've done is they've actually had meetings at 5:30 and they've had meetings at 6 o'clock. And what they found is there's very little change between 5:30 and 6 on attendance.
Okay, I nominate 5:30.
Agreed.
Great.
Thank you.
That way they can come straight and work instead of having that 30 minutes.
okay, so now we need to do is set up the next work session. Before that.
Work session's going to be April 16th at 10 a.m.
April 15th.
And then the public hearing will be on April 18th. And we're going to have a meeting with Mr. Norris at 1 o'clock. And then we'd go into our session at 1:30. And then April 25th will be the other public hearing at 5:30 p.m. Y'all have any other, you got anything else you want to bring up? You?
Nope.
You?
No, I'm good.
Okay. So can we close the public session unless y'all have anything else you want to bring up?
Okay. I guess we stand adjourned.
Thank you.
As I said, if you want a copy, I have that up here if you're interested.